Welcome, everyone. If we could call this meeting to order. If we could start with a moment of silence for prayer or reflection. Thank you. Councillor Dumanowski.
Your Worship, point of privilege, just want to give my support, and I'm sure the community's support, to the Medicine Hat Mavericks, who are currently playing the Edmonton Prospects, thank you, and in hopes of winning the Western Major Baseball League Championship. So they've done very well and been to a few games this summer, and since I've been back from holidays, and they've surprised I think the crowd and this community, and in some games where we thought it might go the other way. So it goes to show that hard work and tenacity and believing in yourself can go a long way. So we're just rooting them on and hoping the community will rally around them and attend games and send out tweets and Facebook and whatnot to show their support.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a point of privilege regarding the CCDA-sponsored Chalk Art Festival, which is running this weekend. I believe it actually starts August 11th. Lost track of my dates here. This is the 8th. So yeah, that would be this weekend and running into the weekend. So there'll be lots of activity in the downtown, and hopefully people will go down and take part in it.
Thank you.
Moving along then to adoption of the agenda. I do have one item to add, and that's collective bargaining with the local union 254 of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. There'll be a motion for ratification, and Councillor Dumanowski will speak to that.
Item 7273.
Yep.
Okay. Any other additions? All right, seeing none, we'll adopt the agenda.
Next, we have adoption of the minutes. On page 3, item 2.1, you'll find minutes of the July 4th regular council meeting.
Any errors, submissions? All right, seeing none, we'll adopt the minutes.
Moving right along now then to our public hearing. On page 9, you'll find item 3.1, which is bylaw 4439, the bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to amend bylaw 4168, the City of Medicine Hat land use bylaw. This is regarding 521C Allowance Avenue rezoning, and I've received no submissions on this.
So we have to have a public hearing, so if anybody would like to come down and speak for or against this bylaw, please come down and state your name. I'll ask a second time. If anybody would like to come down and speak for or against this bylaw, please come down and state your name. Now I'll ask a third and final time. If anybody would like to come down and speak for or against this bylaw, please come down and state your name. All right, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Do we want to deal with this now for second and third reading?
I move that bylaw number 4439 be read a second time.
I'll second that.
Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Worship. I just have some questions about the timing. Why are we waiting? If all the buildings in this node were once recognized as low-density residential back in the day before the commercial zoning was put in place, what is the sense of bringing the area back to council for the new designation? In the note that we have, it says, staff advised that another land use bylaw amendment for the neighboring properties will be forthcoming. So at some point in the future, all of those residences are going to come back for low-density residential. And I'm just wondering why we're just singling out this one property. I know there's an urgency about it, but for the sake of expediency and I guess for economy, why aren't we doing them all at the same time? So that's my first question. And then I have a subsequent question that I'd like to address to our acting CAO about the review of projects like the River Flats Area Redevelopment Plan. So just a question about that.
So you're suggesting we just do an overlay and deal with them all at once, is what your question is?
That's the question.
Did that come up at MPC?
Yeah, it did, and it's a process, again, that has to happen the correct way. So we asked that question also, why don't we do them all? And it's a process that has to happen because it's a new land use bylaw, and they have to redo that part to get it changed again. It can't be done all at once. Because some people might not want to do that, right? That was some of the questions that came forward. Somebody might want to leave it the way it is right now.
So there needs to be time for consultation with the landowners.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, I understand that. So subsequent question, if I may. This plan, the River Flats Area Redevelopment Plan, was developed in January 2011. And I'm just looking at this, and basically we're talking about a residential area. That east side of Allowance Avenue they're all old residential homes. And I guess the question I have is, how often, or why would the planners for the River Flats Area Redevelopment Plan think of that as a commercial area? Those are homes where people are living and have lived for ages. Why would this be a change? And I guess I could direct that question through our CAO or through our Commissioner for Development and Infrastructure. What would be the purpose in doing that? Imposing a visionary, the vision of planners on a residential neighborhood?
Go ahead.
Through the chair, with respect, it's not the vision of planners. It was the vision of the community. There was an extensive engagement process that went on. It was a very active advisory committee. Through that process, a number of attributes from the historic community was seen as appropriate in bringing forward into the future vision of the plan. And part of that, an integral part of that, is a vibrant commercial component that serves the neighborhood. That's why this area is identified as a future neighborhood commercial site. With respect to the previous question, I think it's a very good one that you asked. Staff, I think, acted very appropriately to look at customer service. We have one property owner who's looking to move with some fairly immediate renovations on this site, wants to maintain and upgrade that property as an ongoing residence. We think that's completely valid and consistent with the lotting pattern that we've got there now. That doesn't negate from the future vision that the plan aspires to. So that's why staff made the recommendation to go forward with this standalone site-specific redesignation to put that back into a residential designation so that the proposed renovations would be conforming rather than non-conforming. And then go through and do a systematic evaluation of additional properties to see which other ones might be premature to have that neighborhood commercial designation at this stage, understanding that that's the ultimate goal.
I appreciate that answer. Through your worship, I guess the question I have is now, of course, the vision has changed because we learned that staff is going to bring forward a recommendation for rezoning that entire east side of Allowance Avenue. Again, that's what the note says.
Well, with respect, through the chair, it's a matter of timing. It's not a matter of the vision changing or being at odds. The land use bylaw is the tool to implement the visionary documents, the area redevelopment plans, the area structure plans. It's at times fairly difficult to accurately identify when properties or districts are going to be ready to convert to achieve that vision. In this case, we think that maybe we were a little bit ahead of the game. But the beauty of this process that is set up in the MGA for the public hearings is that we can very quickly make those adjustments and calibrate back to the expectations and desires of the community.
And I appreciate that explanation. It just seems like there's contradictory things here. Legal non-conforming sounds like a contradiction in terms. And then we've got the idea that there's a vision that's expressed clearly in the River Flats Area Redevelopment Plan, and yet we're going to be going back to some kind of redesignation of the zoning bylaw. Anyway, thank you for the explanation.
Thank you, Councillor Friesen.
Well, thank you, and on the same vein, and I guess through the chair to Commissioner Schwarzenberger as well, I'm not necessarily opposed to this, but I share some of the same thoughts, I guess, about it. I struggled a little bit internally because you worked very hard on the River Flats Area Redevelopment Plan, and there was a lot of input there. And there is a vision for this area that I'm not sure, having one in the middle of the bigger vision that's inconsistent is necessarily what my vision of a good planning principle would be. So while I'm not opposed to it, I just am struggling a little bit to understand if the vision within the River Flats area redevelopment plan is to have a commercial component there as part of the vibrancy of that area, why then are we entertaining a residential one kind of smack in the middle? And I think you partially answered that, but could you give me a little bit more clarity?
I'll try through the chair. The plans as they're set out, they are intended to be guiding documents, very visionary. Sometimes it's a near-term vision, sometimes it's a little bit more distant. The market is really what dictates that. And in this case, the market, very specifically through this property owner, is saying, we believe there's more residential life in this part of the neighborhood, and we're willing to invest in it. So we're responding to that as staff, saying, okay, the timing for the residential conversion, we're not seeing or hearing any indications that there are commercial interests ready to redevelop these sites. So that, and this is a very common practice. This isn't unique at all. This is something that goes on a fairly regular basis. There's decisions made in terms of where people want to invest their money, whether it's commercial, residential, or industrial. And the administration tries its best to align those interests with the policy interests, policies that have been adopted by the community through their council. The planning documents, I want to be careful with my words. They're guiding, and they should be, but they're not written in stone. So that's by intent. So there is some flexibility built into it. Land use bylaws are written in stone until council amends the bylaw. But there's a public input process through the public hearing process, such as what we're doing tonight. We haven't seen any speakers in favor or against. That indicates to me fairly strongly that there's not an opposition. You usually, if there's an issue, they usually get the negative side that comes out to public hearings, much more so than you would the positive side. So our analysis from a technical point of view is the vision's still achievable. It's just going to take time. And that's perfectly in tune with area structure plans.
Okay.
If I could just, yeah, it's a great explanation, and I certainly, I don't want to be the one to stand in the way. It's not that with me. It's looking at the greater vision. So let's suppose down the road, consistent with the plan, there is some commercial development, and yet there's some single residential areas where we've said, yes, we'll redesignate, but they don't want the commercial any longer because we've allowed the residential enhancements. So those are the things that trouble me when I think about this, but I, again, don't want to stand in the way, as you've so astutely pointed out. And, you know, the residents had a lot of input, or not just the residents, but the city in some cases, people in the city, of developing this and giving input for it. And these things can be changed based on future input as well. So I won't oppose it, but those are the things that go through my mind.
I'll just add one more thing. I was having a conversation with a colleague, planning colleague, not that long ago, about this type of process, and his words ring kind of in my ear right now, that planning, especially the conversion of neighborhoods from one use or mix of uses to another, is messy, because it doesn't happen in one fell swoop. It happens in stages over time, and it's driven by market conditions. There's lots, single-family detached dwellings in downtown Calgary that are surrounded by multi-story commercial mixed-use buildings. So it does take time, and at some point in time, that conversion will happen in those properties as well.
Thank you, Councillor Cox.
Well, just further to Commissioner Schwarzenberger's point, and I think if we think back to other areas of the Flats is hard to get a handle on, quite frankly. And we try, and we want to put everything in little boxes and categories and zones. And this isn't the first time it's kind of defied our approach on this. We were looking at light industrial along Industrial Avenue. And the demand was for multi-purpose or multifamily. And it's working quite well. And we kind of had to, again, go against the grain to do that. But it was market-driven and user-driven. And so I think what we're finding here is the vision for commercial, neighborhood commercial, isn't quite there. And there's still lots of opportunity for residential, and why wouldn't we honor that? So I think when we're dealing with the flats, I think we have to, in particular, any area, quite frankly, but the flats seems to be a little hard to categorize and get a handle on. So you have to remain flexible.
Good points. Any other questions or comments? Well, I take us back to Council's number one strategic priority, which is economic development. And right now, the highest and best use, which the private sector is telling us right now, is residential, and it's not commercial. If we were in boom times and things were going, we might put a halt to something like this, but right now we are supposed to be, I think, entertaining all sorts of development, whether in all areas of the community right now. So, any other questions or comments? Okay, we have a mover. Oops, Councillor Dumanowski.
Your Worship, I apologize for the last-minute point. I'll make some points on this as well, not because we have a short agenda, but I grew up 4 houses down from this, north of this. I'm very familiar with this area, and that doesn't mean I have greater or higher credibility on this decision than anyone else. But as far as the River Flats redevelopment plan, I know that was a 5-year process. It was very involved, and it was creating a vision. I think the commissioner said it eloquently, and maybe some might even find it ironic that I support this, because even though you create a vision, and the fact that it was done some years ago, and this is coming forward 6, 7, 8 years later, suggests that the best use for this area is not conforming with what the vision of the day was. And I think you have to be flexible in your plans, as Councillor Cox said, not just with River Flats, any area that has a plan in place. Where I have trouble when we deviate from redevelopment plans is when we do it 2 weeks after we passed it, i.e. Herald. Or we do it, we deviate from different standards from, in this area, we have architectural requirements or overlays, and we deviate because somebody comes with a different story that is not commensurate with what the plan says. And I could give a number of scenarios, and so could you, but this has been here a number of years. We haven't seen any sudden changes. It doesn't appear, as the commissioner said, that there is any appetite for that now. The fact that we have residents who want to invest outside of the economic component, which is legitimate, they do that either as a legitimate investment or at their own peril, because at some point, if the vision starts to conform with the area and it does become commercial, they now have invested in a residence that's now smack in the middle of commercial. But it may be that this will not end up being the commercial district. It may move elsewhere. We have all kinds of things going on right now near the arena. There are other areas of the River Flats that are in the transition between residential and commercial, many of which are on the west side of Maple Avenue. It's kind of a morphing reality that we have to accept, and I think the fact that this was done many, many years ago, but is still a legitimate redevelopment plan, and now today we have somebody who's saying, look, I want to, with my investment, do something that's incongruent with the plan, and there isn't a lineup of people here saying otherwise, I think we have to support it, so I do support it.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Worship. And just as a follow-up, I think your comments, Councillor Dumanowski, beg the question, and I'd like to address it to our Commissioner of Development and Infrastructure. How often are these redevelopment plans addressed and re-examined? Because I think that's maybe the bigger issue. I think that the public and our staff need to reconsider these plans as they develop. They're not written in stone. I think they're really an important living document. And so there may be some of these things that need to be considered again in a re-examination of a plan like River Flats redevelopment. So the question again is, how often do we review these visions?
Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, I think it can vary in terms of, how active a community is, what the growth rate is, what the turnover rate in certain properties is. But I think 5 to 7 years, maybe stretching out a little bit longer than that, is a pretty good benchmark. With the updating of our municipal development plan, that's going to trigger some additional reviews. It's also going to trigger some additional projects associated with areas that don't have area structure plans, area redevelopment plans. So part of it's sort of what's ideal, and part of it's what's practical in terms of what's in the queue. But I would say we'd probably do a reset after the municipal development plan is adopted by council, and then we'd set out our schedule in terms of what we think are the priorities.
Thank you very much, and that makes lots of sense, I think, to do that.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, we have a mover and seconder on second reading, if we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
So I move that the bylaw be read a third time and passed.
I'll second that.
Any questions, comments? All right, we'll call the question. Congratulations to the applicants. I know that was maybe a little stressful having to hear all that political talk, even though it went unanimous anyway, so congratulations. Okay.
Thank you. Moving on to reports now. First report's item 4.1 on page 16, the Administrative Committee meeting of July 19th. This report's for adoption and information.
Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Worship. This question I'd like to address to our acting CAO, Commissioner Charlton, that is. So when the city debenture borrows, doesn't this add to our overall debt position? And I thought that was sort of one of our big concerns. And in this case, how can this briefing note suggest that there's no public implication when tax dollars go to support the interest on our debt? And I'm just...
So this is a utility debenture borrowing, so it's not
Yes.
tax?
No tax. So it's strictly on the operational cost of the utility that's going to pay this off, but it does add to our debt. And it provides more working capital. It means that the council is more actively involved in passing these debentures. Is that correct?
Anytime there's a change, that certainly we have a budget amendment that we come forward with. I think if you're looking for details on this, that Acting Commissioner Mach may have some specific details for you, but your premise is right, that it does add. The other premise is it isn't tax-related, it is utility-related. So having said that, perhaps Acting Commissioner would like to respond.
So correct me if I'm wrong, the working capital was in a deficit position anyway, so this is in some ways just a debt wash. Go ahead.
Through the chair, yes, that is correct. So the working capital is in a deficit situation, I guess one can say. However, so the intention of this briefing note, by changing the funding source, it does free up working capital to execute the shallow utilities business model, which was approved by council last year. Now, the existing assets that would be funded through this working capital are not eligible for financing through ACFA. So the only way to fund these would be through working capital, hence why we're changing funding sources from previously approved capital budget items to debt so that it frees up that working capital to fund the shallow utilities business model.
Okay. Councillor McIntosh.
Thanks, Your Worship. So I'm a little bit more confused now than I was before. So we would not be able to use debenture financing for this in a traditional situation. Would that be a fair comment?
That's correct. So the shallow utilities business model, you cannot use debenture financing for existing assets. So assets that have already been put into the ground. So the initial run of the shallow utilities business model is compensating certain developers for assets that have already been constructed. You cannot finance that through ACFA.
But these other projects that we're changing the funding source, you can debenture finance. So it comes back to my question, if it makes sense today to use debenture financing, why was that not the plan from the outset?
So generally, in the past, it has been the practice to, within the electric distribution, to fund through working capital. However, with the favorable rates, it is moving more towards debenture financing.
Plus, this was part of the contributed capital. This was a private investment that was contributed capital, and now we're paying them back for their unsold capital. So we couldn't have borrowed against the private sector and then paid them back.
Correct.
Debenture borrowing. If that makes any sense. Councillor Turner?
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess what I was looking at this, and I guess we did take a debenture out for the electric generation when we, I think it was about 66 million for the new generating site we built, but that's coming about 10 million under budget. So I guess as far as the borrowing capacity, we're actually going to end up being less than we thought we were. So that should offset some of that for sure.
True. Councillor Varga?
I'm going to change the topic a little bit just to go on some of the process, the storm main lining. I'd love to know, how old are these pipes that we're going to line right now? Just one question. How long have they been in the ground? And my second question was, how long have they been doing this lining? It's a great process. I've seen it happen. I've seen it, and I've seen it done, and it's a great option if we can do it. I'm just wondering where the 50 years lifespan comes from. Have they been doing it for 50 years with this liner, that they know that it's going to last 50 years? I'd love to know that.
Through the chair, in some cases, these pipes are in the 50 to anywhere up to 80-year, 100-year age. And there's two tender items. One on, let me see if I can find it here. 4.1 item 2 and 4.3 item 1 are both coming from the same funding source. It was split purposely because the second item, those projects are much more tricky, a lot more difficult. The first item, they appear to be just tailor-made. They're in good structural shape, but their integrity is going to be more and more suspect as years go by. So they're excellent candidates for lining. And the estimates based on industry data is that it could extend the life of these pipes upwards of 50 years.
I guess I struggle with that information when this process hasn't been going on for 50 years, and yet they give a date of being lasting 50 years once they do the process, right? The data doesn't culminate long enough to even know that they're going to last 50 years, right? That's a guesstimate again, or an estimate that they're going to last that long with the process, I believe, correct?
Through the chair, there's no historic data.
Right.
But there's a lot of testing that is done that they can get a theoretical life expectancy. That's pretty common practice.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a great idea that we don't have to dig up the roads and move forward when we can line it and make the pipes work just the way they are, if not better, for flow through and how it's flowing once it's done. So how many miles of pipe are we going to do, or kilometers?
I can get you that. I don't have the number off the top of my head.
Is it lots?
It's quite a few, yeah.
Okay. Thank
Any
you.
other questions or comments? All right, if we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
The next report's item 4.2 on page 24, Public Services Committee meeting of July 24th, and this report's for adoption.
I move this report for adoption.
Second.
Any comments? So I'm going to guess that you would like to speak on this item, Councillor Varga.
And I know that Councillor Friesen knows that I speak about this all the time, right? I guess my comment on this was just from when I was a minor hockey general manager, and we asked for funds sometimes too, right? And I know that it was always nice to have the little bit of funds come extra for that, but we knew any sporting event that we did, we usually gave a profit after that. We worked towards getting a profit. So my first question is, how many of the second level funds are given to groups, which is probably a question you can't answer. I don't know if most of them make money on their sporting events. I hope they do, so they don't have to use the money that's being used. My second question is, I guess when I see that only $200 is given to a group, a lot of times that doesn't do much help on that. I know it's a gesture at $200, but if it's something when you're asking for 1,000 and you only get 200, it's tough to accept that. You know what I mean? Because that means they only get half of it, which is $100, and the other $100 only comes after they show that they have a deficit, right, during their games. And I think BMX Championship, I think they're going to probably raise some money and funds during that competition to actually have more money in their pocket at the end. I would hope that they do that. So I guess I just question the fact of the matter that $200 is only given when they ask for 1,000, especially when there's funds in, and I know it's a process, don't get me wrong. I know you've told me that many times, Councillor Friesen, that it's a process and they scrutinize it quite handily and look to give the money to more places than they can, and they've got money in the funds. So I'm just wondering about that, where they ask for 1,000 but get 200, right? So I probably, sorry, just saying it as a minor hockey guy, I probably would have said, no, you don't have to send me that $200, right? So.
Go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, I will respond the best I can, and I know you really care about these items. Councillor Varga, you do always ask, and so I pay particularly close attention when I'm at those meetings, because I know I'm going to have to try to answer some of your questions. You're well aware of the process, but just again, so everyone understands how it works, there are 3 funding windows of $5,000 each. These groups, the policy and the criteria are, certainly available in many different ways so that people can access them, the groups can access them, and individuals too, as you see in this case. And then when those applications come in, they're weighed against that criteria and the process, and they're also vetted at the committee level. I'm not talking about the Public Services Committee either, and you're aware of that. So anyway, what happens is that they estimate on their budget submission how they are going to get funded for this and how they think it will turn out and so on. Sometimes a funding application comes in and there are a number of things on there that would not qualify within the criteria, but there are many that would, so it's okay. Anyway, so then they're given half of that money, but they don't get the other half until their event is complete. They send in their final figures, and it's determined if they made money, they don't get the other half because they don't need the other half, and that's the part that I think people don't quite understand. If they have not made money and they still need the other half of that funding that was allocated, they are certainly sent that money. Now, I know what you're saying about the $200, and if I had been voting, I would have tended to agree with you. I would tend to agree with you. It's a limited pot of money, and so there are all kinds of things taken into consideration. And I think it is probably true that some groups or individuals find the process of application and sending the budget in after is too onerous for $100 or $200, and so they may not choose to do it again. But I can tell you that the staff over at Parks and Rec really will assist individuals or groups if they have questions or they don't understand how to fill it in or those kinds of things. They're always happy to support. So I can't, without commenting on particulars about that one, which I don't think is appropriate, in an open meeting, I can't say much more, but I really appreciate your questions because sometimes these amounts of money don't seem a lot, but they make a big difference to those applying.
Thank you. Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I guess my question was on the first one as well. When you see the BMX World Championships, I'm just thinking, I'm wondering how big this event really is when you're talking about a world championship, and then we give them $200. I guess that was my concern when I looked at the other two events that were funded. So we just had a presentation, I think, at the last council meeting with the hockey when we were doing $100,000. So
So
I'm not sure, I think that's part of our, bringing sports tourism to the city.
Yeah, so I'll interrupt you a little bit. So the two events that were almost 100% funded are local events, supporting many, many athletes, whereas the BMX is external and one athlete. So we didn't want to really talk too much about it, but, so I think they make a criteria, the money's going to stay local, sports tourism. Yes, yes. Yeah.
If I could just add, these are discussions that go on at some length at that table. The advisory committee really wrestles with that. Is it, it doesn't say in the criteria we will favor local, but they certainly take into account events that would involve many athletes or many people as opposed to one. But by the same token, it also needs to be taken into account that a world championship is far greater profile than a local one. So those conversations go back and forth and on, and just so you know, I don't have a vote at, whoever is the council rep, just like our other ones, I don't have a vote at that table, but yeah, it's often a very interesting conversation.
Councillor Simmons?
I just wanted to point out the District 4 Little League was just, they just had this big tournament. I'm not sure if anybody's had an opportunity to go, but I was there. It's amazing the amount of people that come into this community and the economic spin-off that happens from these small grants. So we invested $2,900 into that Canadian Championships. And what we got in return was all of our hotels were full, and we had economic tourism going on like crazy in our community. People were buying stuff from the mall, they were buying stuff from downtown, they were visiting Medalta, they were doing all kinds of amazing things. So I think we really have to look at these grants and think about the economic spin-off that can happen for our community and what it does for our community overall. And so we also had people from the Toronto Blue Jays were down here looking at our community and donated to our field because of these amazing groups. So I just wanted to congratulate them on that. And I think when we're looking at these things, we really have to look at how does it affect our community in particular. So.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson?
Thank you, Worship. I had the privilege in Councillor Friesen's absence of chairing this meeting, and I have to record two things. The first one is that we had these same questions answered by the representatives from the committee. And the second thing I should tell you is that this was the shortest Public Service Committee meeting on record. I think it was something like 4 or 5 minutes. But all of these questions were addressed and answered. The problem with the international is that this is an individual who has chosen to go. I asked the question about competition that would lead to being selected to go, and unclear about that. So this is just somebody who is going into that competition we're unclear about how they arrived to be the delegate from Alberta. So this is just one way of supporting their effort as they represent our city. And Councillor Simmons is quite right. With these other two ventures, Your Worship as well, this is local competition, and we certainly want to support those kinds of things. The ball tournament being outstanding, and the curling competition as well. These are grants that are given to people representing our city in provincial, national, even international competition. And each of these local competitions are in fact provincial competitions and deserve our support.
Any other questions or comments? I mean, ultimately, council has the authority to change the priorities and overrule these recommendations, but I would highly recommend that you only do that in a very, very rare case because it undermines the group that makes the recommendations. But ultimately, we could. All right, any other, Councillor Friesen?
I just one closing comment, because I'm a little bit troubled by, I know it wasn't intended, and I'm so proud of these, and the economic spin-off comment, very well said. I wish I'd thought of that to say earlier, but I'm glad you did, because for the amount of investment that $5,000 generates is enormous in payback. I don't want to leave the impression, though, that there is less value placed on an individual athlete of excellence. I do not want that impression left. An event that's local, that has a lot of participants and a lot of athletes, is wonderful. So is an event that one single person asks for funding to attend. And these are tremendous personal achievements that sometimes people have devoted most of their life to preparing for. So I just don't want to leave the impression that because the grant amount is small, that there is less value placed.
Through the chair, can I just add to your comment? I think in this particular case with the BMX motorcyclist or the cyclist, we weren't clear on how this person opted to attend this event in the international competition. And so therefore we're supporting somebody, but in terms of what you're saying, there is no way of knowing how this person compares to others in the province or even in the city. Probably the best in the city, but maybe beyond that, we don't know. Certainly worthy of our support, and I'm not trying to take anything away from your comment, Councillor Friesen, but I think because we don't know those kinds of things, it makes sense to support it with a token amount rather than full amount.
Okay. Councillor Simmons.
So I don't want to beat this to death, but I'm gonna. So I think I agree with you absolutely, and I think that we have to look at how it impacts the city as well when we're looking at this funding. And so certainly somebody going international and getting international recognition for a sporting event that they're involved in also impacts the city's economics. I think for me, I was just pointing out that the economics that happened this past week, but certainly if somebody's going international on a sporting event and that's getting media coverage for Medicine Hat, that also impacts Medicine Hat. So, yeah.
All right, any other questions or comments? If we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
The next report is item 4.3 on page 27, Administrative Committee meeting July 26. This report's for information.
So second.
Any comments? Okay, if we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
Item 4.4 you'll find on page 30, Administrative Committee meeting of August 2nd. This report's also for information.
So move.
Second.
Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Worship. I have several questions, and I guess the first one should be directed again to our Commissioner of Development Infrastructure. The tender recommendation for runway 321 and taxiway, I guess I'm concerned about possible travel disruptions for airlines coming into our city. Could you tell us a little bit about what the plans are to accommodate that, and also about the timeline? How long will it take to complete this kind of renovation?
Go ahead, yeah, this question was asked as well, go ahead.
Through the chair, of course, this project is a fairly significant project for the airport and its operation, so the stakeholders have been extensively engaged, the airport operators, the tenants, the airlines in particular. We'd originally thought that we might be able to maintain service, safe service, by doing one half, splitting the runway in half lengthwise, doing one half at a time and keeping the other half open for traffic. We didn't get unanimous agreement on that. We had one airline that expressed some concerns. So we looked at some alternatives, and what we came up with in collaboration with the stakeholders was a daytime construction program with early morning activity, flight activity, and one of the airlines in particular moved their schedule to have evening traffic a little bit later. So we can accommodate traffic, regular traffic, on a daily basis while construction is going on. The two activities will not interfere with each other. We have a plan for any emergency use of the airstrip if necessary. We can demobilize from the runway very quickly to allow any emergency landings or takeoffs. And the timeline, we're intended to start up on August 21st. It should be about 4 to 6 weeks. So by the end of September, we'll be done.
Thank you very much. A subsequent question, I guess, has to do with the South Boundary Road. I have to express thanks to the County of Cypress for their $250,000 contribution toward that improvement. But at one point, I thought we were going to do this maybe in another year. So I'm wondering if you could comment on why this project has moved ahead. And was it as a result of any pressure from the county? They've been quite critical of us in local media.
Through the chair, great questions. As council's aware, administration with any of its infrastructure does annual assessments and continues on an annual basis to update its priority list for projects. That's what occurred in this case. South Boundary Road is a arterial road that's a rural cross-section design. It's in comparison to the other arterial roads in the city, it was deemed to be ready for some work. So it didn't get jumped in the queue. It went through the process we always go through, and it was evaluated that it needed to be done. Now, yes, it was nice to receive the $250,000 from Cypress County. That helps. The project's going to start this fall and should be completed this fall. It will result in in better sight lines, better drainage. It will also have obviously a smoother carriageway, but it'll also be wider. Currently, the average width of the asphalt surface is 7.4 meters. It will be widened to 8 meters, so it'll make it a safer traveling surface. One thing it is not, and I should make this clear in public, it's not designed to have pedestrians on it. It's not intended to have pedestrian access. The right-of-way, being a rural cross-section, has got V-ditches in it. It doesn't lend itself to a design for a separated pathway. We have engaged with the administration of Cypress County in terms of what triggers might there be that would start talks towards joint development of linking pathways. And the agreement was that would be part of the upcoming discussions with intermunicipal development plan updates.
That's exciting to hear, and I'm especially concerned about cyclists using that road if it's not wide or if there's not a shoulder to ride on.
Well, with 8 meters, it'll be better, but we need to be clear about the fact that it's not designed for pedestrians in particular, and if there's any cyclists on that road, whether it's daytime or nighttime, they should be really well visible. They should wear visible clothing, reflective gear if possible.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Councillor Friesen.
Well, quickly, yes, I'm very happy about South Boundary and to thank the county as well. They've always been good neighbors, and they've shown their neighborliness again, and I thank them for that. And I also agree that I think I'm glad this has moved up a little bit. I think it needs to be done. It's not in particularly good shape, and I'm glad we're doing it. My question was, and it's just a brief one, around the taxiway rehabilitation and the runway at the airport. And I wanted to be clear on one thing. The source of financing is from ACAP. I wanted to be clear that that was 100% financed. This is a significant amount of money. If I was reading about this in the newspaper, I'd want to know about the funding. That's for sure. In these times when we've said it's so tough, and here we're spending, $10 million on our airport. So I just like to clarify that. And the other thing that I wondered about was if you could maybe give us a little more insight, I guess, into how this will allow potentially larger types of aircraft into the future. Because in reading it, I saw that, all of the scope of work was really interesting and beneficial. I wasn't sure what difference it would make for a larger aircraft, though.
Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair. First question with regard to the funding source. Yes, it's a large project. It's been estimated to be about a $12 million overall project. It's completely funded through federal grants. We applied for those some time ago, and we received positive news that we were successful. This was going to be on the books until we were successful, so it's an important piece of infrastructure for the city as a whole. So, and it's timely. So we're very thankful that we got the grants. In terms of the benefits of doing the project, it's first and foremost to maintain what we have. We've got some drainage issues out there. We've got some wear and tear on the surface itself. It's becoming very problematic. It's not unsafe, but if it's left to go down the deterioration trajectory that it is now, we'll have some real issues. It's not going to lengthen the runway. It will allow for the current traffic that we have. It may allow for the next generation up, or the next sizes up, like the Q400s, to land more safely, just because of the type of the surface it will have. And as new technology improves with aircraft design, that will also enable the aircraft that have shorter landing and takeoff capacities to access our airport as well. Should mention, we are looking at updating our strategic planning document for the airport from the purpose of evaluating whether or not industry has changed or is projected to change to the degree that we either do or do not need an extension at some point in the future of the runway to accommodate future economic development aspirations.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm not sure who's going to answer this question. WestJet just recently announced that they are postponing the rollout of their low-cost carrier until 2018 at some point, and they are looking for a secondary or tertiary airport somewhere in Canada as the base or the hub for that. With the changes that have taken place at our airport in the last couple of years, would we qualify for what they would be looking for? And if so, are we beating their door down, letting them know we're here?
Go ahead.
Through the chair, I'm not entirely sure of the list of their specifications because, quite frankly, they probably wouldn't give us the whole list until they really got down to brass tacks. But I can assure you that there's a lot of bruised knuckles from rapping on their door. We've been in constant conversations with them.
I would assume that there's, even their low-cost aircraft would be the 737. That's what they fly for efficiency. And the 737, of course, can take off here half full, but they would be using us as a hub. They would want them full. So, anyway. Any other questions or comments? Right, if we can vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
Moving on now to reports for reception. Our first one is item 5.1, Municipal Planning Commission meeting minutes of June 28th, on page 37.
I move this report for reception.
I'll second that.
Any comments? No? Very active report. A lot of, don't want to sound like this is an election year, but there's a lot of construction going on, new homes and businesses starting up. It'd be good to see the quarterly report when it comes again. Any other comments? All right, if we can vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
Next report for reception is item 5.2 on page 49, Heritage Resources Committee meeting minutes of July the 11th.
I move this report for information.
I'll second.
Any comments? All right, seeing none, if we could vote. And that was unanimous, thank you.
Moving on now to new business. Item 7.1 is on page 51, HatSmart funding status update, and this is just for information.
Do I need to move that for information, or is it, then I will do that.
Any comments?
I think I just briefly, if I may, Your Worship, the report speaks for itself. The big uptake, of course, is no surprise, attic insulation, and will probably run out. So if you had plans or designs on getting some help from the city, get your applications in early, because as we said before, we've got a fixed amount of money, and we're not going to add to the pot this year.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Varga.
Just a question on the diagram where it says the drain water heat recovery. I don't know how much money's in that kitty, but will some of that be moved over maybe to some of the other three that might run out of money? Is that a possibility or not?
It's a possibility, but I think the report itself says we're not doing that now. We want to leave that money, even though none of it's been subscribed at this point. And there's not a lot there. I'll defer to Acting Commissioner Mach, but it seems to me that it would only be diverted at the very end if one of the other programs was oversubscribed.
Go ahead.
Through the chair, yes, that is correct. So At the end of the year, any outstanding applications that have not been funded, funding will get moved around accordingly based on the date of application.
Thank you. Councillor Dumanowski.
Well, just to the point that Councillor Cox made about the attic insulation being subscribed, I did try to do my part to retweet. I've been told we're fully subscribed, and so it's not even a matter of getting it in or making application. Those who made application or did met the conditions, I guess, for this initial work would be wise to get them in quickly because that fund is fully subscribed. And we went through this, what is it, last year, where we had a number of people who didn't feel they were informed. And so by bringing this up, I think we're trying to do everything we can to say, look, it was a great success, but there is a limit. And get your applications in to show that you've done the work so that you too can hopefully, and that's the operative word, hopefully be one of the people who will get the grant in the end. But it is fully subscribed, so kudos to our staff again for the funding and council for supporting this. But ultimately, I just don't want to see the same kind of situation occur where people felt like they were led astray or they were led to believe that there was a pot of money there that would always be there as, pending the fact that they got their application in. But in this case, it may be oversubscribed, so get it in.
Good, thank you. Any other comments? All right, if we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
Next, we move on to the item we added tonight, collective bargaining with local union 254 of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. This motion for ratification covers the workers at the electric generation, water treatment plants, and electric distribution, and Councillor Dumanowski will speak to this.
Worship, I'm pleased to move that. Number one, the memorandum of agreement reached between the City of Medicine Hat and Local Union 254 of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers at the electrical generation and water treatment plants, as well as, two, the memorandum of agreement between the City of Medicine Hat and Local Union 254 of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers at electric distribution, concerning the renewal of two collective agreements for the term of January 1st, 2016 to December 31st, 2019, and providing, inter alia, for the following general wage adjustments are hereby approved and ratified. 3% effective January 1st, 2016, 0% effective January 1st, 2017, 2% effective January 1st, 2018, and 2% effective January 1st, 2019.
Getting a seconder on that? Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councillor Dumanowski?
Well, Your Worship, I'm pleased that this is before us today. A couple of thoughts. I think the first point that may catch some people by surprise or otherwise is let's start with the good news. The fact is we have at 0% in 2017. We now have the majority of our union base who have understood the financially fit challenge that we were faced with and came to understand it very well to the point that their membership could support and did support a 0% for January 1st, 2017. That is extraordinary. It's no reflection on us. This isn't about us. And it's hard to say anything at this time of the year when it appears that it's affecting an election, as you said, Your Worship. This isn't about that. This is about achieving and working toward a plan that was well orchestrated and communicated by staff, extraordinarily well communicated, and the public got it. Not always liked it. We didn't always like everything about it, but the fact remained and remains that we needed to take some extraordinary steps to deal with the commodity downfall and ultimately our revenue shortcomings because of that fact. We have a segment now of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers who are giving their support, as other unions have, QP, and who was the other one? Fire. and are lending their support with a 0% in January 1st, 2017. Now, the 3% in 2016 is commensurate with what was the average settlement prior to the turning of events, if you will. These percentages, I can't speak to them in a lot of detail, but are very much in alignment with what was happening in this industry across the province. It's a very competitive environment to be in, and we are in a utility, and we need and support the members that belong to these unions, and are making good, if you will, on the agreement prior to the request for 0% in 2017. Carrying forward into 2018 and 19 with 2% demonstrates our goodwill going forward for their support with a 0 in 17. I will say this with some trepidation, but from what I can gather, this 0% is not only unprecedented, it hasn't happened elsewhere. And the fact remains, they are doing their part, and in return, we are giving some future consideration and I guess support for their agreement in the 2017 year going into the 2018-19 years. I have tremendous gratitude towards our staff for working through this. This was not an easy agreement to achieve, and I have tremendous support and thanks to our unions, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Distribution, for supporting this and for supporting that 0%. And I want to congratulate Mr. Gallant in his article on Saturday, which was well documenting the settlements across this province. And you know, you might say, well, there's a politician talking right now, and that's me. But Mr. Gallant is not a politician, and he published an article that very clearly, if you haven't seen it, Saturday's paper very clearly identified some remarkable things happening here in Medicine Hat. And I think it's a testament to, again, a good communication plan by staff about the realities of financially fit, the need for it, and staff in all the unions saying, you know what, we understand and we'll do our part. And I'm very thankful. So I take a lot of solace and gratitude in presenting these recommendations to Council today.
Thank you. Councillor Cox.
I don't have a lot to add to that. Councillor Dumanowski well states the realities of the situation we faced. I think what I want to say is that we as a council knew, as our community knew, that this was a difficult time for the economy and certainly a difficult time for the city of Medicine Hat with the collapse of oil and gas prices and our financially fit program. We took a tough line. We knew that we could not, to our community, justify increases in a year in which everybody seemed to be suffering. And we set the example by saying we would take 0% ourselves, our management would take 0%, and we gave that direction to our staff to go to the bargaining table and communicate that position. Clearly, our staff have done an excellent job of that. They did an excellent job of informing us as a council of the realities of the marketplace, the economy in which we were operating, what we could reasonably and not reasonably expect to see happen. So we had good information, we made good decisions, and we gave clear direction to our staff. And they went out and negotiated our position in a reasonable, forthright manner with the unions who responded in kind. They clearly had good information coming to them. They took responsible decisions, and it's very satisfying to see this result come forward at this time.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, if we could vote. That was unanimous. Thank you. Don't have my gavel. Seeing no more business before this council, we're adjourned.
something.